So Apple has revealed their M2 processors, and I just wanted to give my thoughts and buying decisions in terms of if I wasn't just reviewing a device but actually going to use full term. So for this video, we're going to be covering kind of my thoughts on the benchmarks, comparing to Windows laptops, stuff of that nature. So let's just dive right in. One of the first things I want to compare is what we're seeing on screen here, stating that you have 1.4x faster than M1 models. And there's been tons of benchmarking showing M1, M1 Pro, M1 Max versus Intel. So really, that's kind of the baseline of what most of this performance is going to be about. If we take a look at some of these comparisons, saying 1.4x faster in CPU, and then here compared to the Air, a lot of this is what I could say explained in the footnotes, which if we scroll all the way to the bottom, we can see here that they stated they compared, let me zoom in here, the M2 8 core, 10 core GPU, 24 gigabytes RAM, which is like the max version, versus just the 8 core GPU. So now you're getting kind of that, like some of their benchmarks said 35% improvements. It really just boils down to just having more cores, which in my opinion is something we saw similar to M1 Pro versus M1 and M1 Max, where if you were going up here, you could see that you get 16 core GPUs, which is basically like two M1s put together, and then M1 Max is four M1s put together. So when thinking about it in that perspective, a lot of the previous benchmarks you could find in other reviewers or some of the stuff I've put out here kind of scales linearly. So when making that decision, you're kind of in this realm where if you're specking out your M1 Pro versus M2, you kind of might as well go to the 14-inch MacBook Pro versus the M2. So when we go into the purchasing page, we can see the actual differences here. Bumps you up to 10 core, 8 core versus the previous M1 MacBook Air. And so, really, the things you're really kind of paying for if you were to stay at the same baseline would theoretically kind of be somewhere here with the 1080p MagSafe charger, is really the increase of the payment that you'll be choosing when comparing to the M1 MacBook Air. And if we just bump over some of these of what you could purchase from the M1 chip, it only starts with 7 core. I'm not exactly sure. Let's see if you could configure this to be 8 core. You can't. So some of these at the 8 core would probably be spec'd. I think you get this at Best Buy for around $1,000 as well. Let's take a look. So yeah, here in Best Buy, you can see that it's $1,000 even compared to what you would get from Apple. But this one comes spec'd at the 8 core graphics GPU. So really, you should be comparing these devices at this price point of $1,000 versus $200 more. And then when you consider, oh, is this going to be faster or not? Well, they compared the 30% gains to the 10 core one versus an 8 core one. So really, I would even think that this might perform similarly to the M1 in terms of just pure, if you're using this for, a lot of people on my channel are looking at gaming reviews, or that's what I've pumped out at least. So the comparison there is probably around 10% efficiency gains. So really, if you need the camera or you want like the MagSafe, or really honestly, one of the things that I'm looking at is it just looks nice with the midnight blue. That would be your considerations if you don't have an M1 device already, or you just want to dabble into the MacBook ecosystem. That would be kind of your entry level in, and you're still only getting 256 gigabytes, which if we compare here to the Best Buy version, which is also 256 at 8 gigabytes RAM. So when making your decisions, I think a lot of people just looking to get into it start with the 8 gigabytes RAM. There's been talks about from some reviewers about swap memory and stuff of that nature, which has been disproven from my belief of my research following Apple products. So really, if I was going into this, I would get at least here and bump up these specs to go 16 gigabytes. This would be my deal. And then I'm not exactly sure if I would pay more to go to 1 terabyte or not. But here at $16.99, you're almost going up to this 14-inch. So you might as well get, I don't know, the 14 core. I think the 2 cores is negligible, but you're kind of getting 4 more GPU cores if this thing scales appropriately. So it almost sounds like they just they maybe had some efficiency gains, but kind of just said, hey, can we fit more cores in instead of doubling the M1 Pro? So I expect the M2 Pro to even be, 10 core. This would be 20 cores. So this would the M2 ones are going to be 16 core or 20 core. Calling it now. They're going to scale from the 8 gigabytes here, and then they have the 10 core version, which would make it 20 core. But really, what remains to be seen is when these devices come out and we could benchmark them is the 8 core versus 8 core, because then you could just always scale linearly and see how the performance is. But here, if we're spending about $300 more, you can get, let's see here, in 1699, you could get, what do you get? You get an HDMI, dedicated HDMI port, and dedicated SD reader. You get a 120 ProMotion. So, you know, I think some that's interesting if what consumers are going to choose when picking the M2, if they're going to go with, you know, choosing the MacBook Air or going to the M1 Pro. Now, one of the benefits of this is also it's light. So if you are doing a lot of couch surfing or stuff of that nature, that could be another reason why I go to the MacBook Air. I think I might actually just purchase this, and I'm not. This is going to be like my long term use because from some of my videos you can see I already have the 3070 G15, which if you kind of saw from the side here, I'm actually just using it. I mine Ethereum. I kind of just use it as a desktop. I don't really use it as a laptop. And then for something for like going around the house or being able to video edit from the couch or sometimes just like moving around, this M2 device with 10 core should suffice in playing at least the video games I play or making content and editing it. Could be that mobile device that if you travel, make 1080p videos, could be something to kind of bring around if you're traveling, depending on what people are doing or being remote like I am. So overall, you know, I'm stuck in between should I just get the M1 Pro and that be my long term device, or getting the M2, reviewing it, making a decision do I want the M1 Pro or M2? So that'll come with further testings in this video, but just wanted to give my thoughts on the M2 and how I guess some of these specs that they're giving out in terms of like it being faster, something to be seen in the benchmarks. But again, with the footnotes here, you're really seeing that compared with the M1, video editing 1.4, 1.2, 1.3. It's almost like with the more cores, of course, it's going to be faster. So I want to see like an 8 core versus 8 core. And then, how better did they make it? If anything, it might even be like zero point 0.1 better, 10% better. And then they just added more cores so they're able to get this like benchmark out. Now, technically, what we would hope for is, let's see, the battery life. That could be something that people like looking at. The battery life was done with an 8 core GPU. So I think maybe that's kind of disingenuous, because they're comparing the performance with one of the more specced out versions, but then when they say, oh, it has the same battery life, they're using the 8 core version. So I would like to see testing with the 10 core version. So that is something that's probably they should have kept things equal, because if people want to get the better performance and then they're expecting 18-hour battery life, I mean, what if it's, only becomes 15-hour battery life? So something to consider. Probably the most important thing, depending on what you're using this device for, should be, battery life and performance. So I feel like that's kind of, in my opinion, that's kind of sketchy. They should use the 10 core for everything, the maxed out version, and then show all the results from the maxed out version, or at least be more clear that hey, we're comparing an 8 core to an 8 core and a 10 core to an 8 core. So kind of sketchy on my part. I don't know if most consumers are going to think that. I think based on their marketing, you're probably just going to be looking at the better screen, the better touch, the better FaceTime, the better camera. And then, yeah, some of it's like, yeah, you do want that better performance compared to an M1. So depending on when this device comes out, that could be something to take a look at. We'll see in a month when I review it. So let me know if you have any questions on config or any questions on M2 and what you're thinking about purchasing. feel free to comment below on that, and I'll do my best to answer all the questions. If you want to follow along with kind of when my bench comes out, I will be posting that, so feel free to sub. And also, if you want to see any content, I have a 37 RTX G15. Anything related to gaming laptops, feel free to comment below as well. So I'll see you guys in the next video. Take care.